A quick announcement before we start today's show. My friends and I on the Portal Linking Artists and Scientists project are hosting a virtual event on April 13th called Envisioning Joint Futures in Art and Astronomy. We have an exciting lineup of speakers, panelists, and even an interactive art workshop. This event is for anyone, anywhere, whether you're an artist, an astronomer, both, or neither. As long as you have an internet connection, you can join us on April 13th to learn more about how to cultivate the crossroads of art and science. The link to register is in our show notes. And now, on to our show. Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange New Worlds. I'm your host, Mike Wong. Although this is nominally a science and Star Trek podcast, I have to admit that often the most important thing in any given Star Trek episode is not scientific. Much more salient is how many Star Trek episodes provide commentary on some aspect of human society and therefore provide a reflection of ourselves, our hopes and dreams and fears about society at any given time. These days, the rise of non-inclusive ideologies and authoritarian tendencies is a great worry for many people in the United States and around the world. Spurred by recent events, my friends over at the Deep Space Love podcast, Joe and Nicole Praska, put together an anti-fascist Star Trek watch list, which was published on the website Twin Cities Geek. You'll see a link to their article in the show notes. And so today, Joe and Nicole are going to beam aboard to tell us about the content of their anti-fascist Star Trek watch list, its creation, and how Star Trek has always been anti-fascist and continues to be so through its most recent series, Starfleet Academy. Ready? Engage! Joe and Nicole Praska, welcome to Strange New Worlds.
Ooh, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm very thrilled for this conversation. This is your first time on the show. I had the pleasure of being on your show, Deep Space Love, a few months ago, and I'm very happy to have you two on board Strange New Worlds. And because it's your first time on the show, I was wondering if I could ask about your Star Trek origin stories. How did you first discover Trek, and what has it meant to you throughout your life?
So Star Trek has been, I feel like part of my life is kind of as long as I can really remember. Like The Next Generation was often just on the TV when I was just a toddler toddling around. Like I vividly remember like the title screens. So it just was like kind of just always a piece of my life. It feels like my dad was really into it. And so I kind of grew up watching it with him a lot. Next Gen was sort of the first one I got really into, but I was into the original series, the movies. I was huge into those. I remember Enterprise was airing when I was starting to be more of like a person making, my own like decisions to watch shows. And so like I remember being really excited because like, oh, this is airing and I'm like watching it like on air, not just like reruns the next day or something. I remember like using a VHS tape to record the Borg episode because I thought it was so exciting at the time. So like I had like that kind of stuff. And then so that was really fun. I mean, there were periods in my life where I kind of fell out of love with it for a little bit, or like I was like, oh, I was trying to be cool or something. But I always found my way back to Star Trek. And especially like, so my dad did pass away eventually when I was like in my early 20s. And so like, I think post then it does feel a little bit like that. Like there's like a connection that's bridged there in a sense. But that being said, Nicole and I met and we went through Star Trek together, kind of became a thing that we do together with our, and then the new Star Treks came and we're just like, it was just right for the time to keep going with it. And so it's just become sort of intertwined with our own relationship and just kind of like the biggest fandom that we sort of are really attracted to and are always excited about and always on top of.
We must be roughly the same age, Joe, because I also had that experience of like getting Star Trek through my family, through my dad in particular, and then feeling real like ownership and agency over Enterprise when that came
Yes.
out. And I was like, this is the one that I'm going to watch from start to finish every single week, and it
Yes.
will be my show.
That's so funny. Yeah, we gotta be. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, obviously our Star Trek stories do join up eventually, but similarly, I also recall watching it as young as I can like think back to. Again, primarily my father as well, being the person who introduced me to Star Trek. I was quite young. Not to make this kind of a downer, but my father is also no longer with us. I was very young, and so I have very vague memories, but just also fostering a love of space. I do have vivid memories of building and launching model rockets with him when I was like a preschool age. So that's sort of kind of branching out beyond Star Trek, but just sort of an overall love of space. And I was not on the Enterprise train. Unfortunately, it was not that cool at the time. It was more of like oh, that was in the past kind of thing. But then when Joe and well, we started dating in high school, and it wasn't until later high school or maybe even like in college when you were like, oh, let's watch some like greatest hits. Like you were kind of getting back into it. And then like I think it just like took a pause for a while, right? Probably longer for me than you. And then we decided we would just start with the original series and go from start to finish, watch every episode, and it definitely escalated from there to every series. And like Joe said, we're now caught up on every new series and branching out beyond that into like comics and audio dramas, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's probably our biggest fandom. And yeah, and the podcast too, Deep Space Love. It's another way to kind of experience our fandom.
Because you're on a science and Star Trek podcast, let's talk a little bit about the science. Because I know, Nicole, you are a scientist. You're a forensic scientist, if I remember correctly, right?
That is correct, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? I don't think I've ever had a forensic scientist on the show. So, like, what does a day-to-day look like, and what kinds of questions are you asking?
Sure. So I am in particular a latent fingerprint examiner at a crime laboratory here in Minnesota. So my day to day looks like processing different like objects that come into the lab, items of evidence to find fingerprints using different methods, different chemicals, usually also powder every once in a while, but actually it tends to be used out more in the field, at least in my lab. And since we have access to a larger range of methods in the lab, we use that. Photography, I also photograph all of my own prints that I do, discover and capture, and then also the comparison process. So marking up the latent or unknown fingerprints, finding the features that we can use to exclude or identify people, and then getting either known prints or searching a database to find similar features and make a conclusion as to whether they came from the same source. I've done kind of some research here and there on fingerprints and their interactions with blood as a matrix, and I teach workshops at conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, ultimately, space is kind of like a hobby, sort of fun scientific endeavor. But yeah, my day to day is looking at fingerprint ridges and patterns, and I do love it.
That's great. Yeah. And if there's ever a Star Trek episode that has a forensics element to it, we should look out for it, and then we can have you back on the podcast to pick it apart.
That would be fun.
And Joe, if I remember correctly, you're a teacher. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm a fourth grade teacher right now, and my license is in K through 6. So this is my 10th year of teaching now in my own classroom, I believe. Yeah.
Wow.
So I've taught at a few different grades. I started out in kindergarten as student teaching, but I've taught anywhere from like second, third, fourth, fifth. I think first is the only one I technically haven't done yet. Just I'm a general ed teacher. I kind of have like the classroom for the whole day. We teach in my school. We technically just teach math, literacy, social studies, health, a little bit of kind of like social emotional learning. They actually go to a specialist for science.
Okay.
which I kind of appreciate. I have taught science in the past in some of the old schools I've been at, but I kind of appreciate that they have like a dedicated science teacher for the elementary ages. That's usually not the case. And I think sometimes with all the pushes to get like specifically math and literacy minutes in always is a big thing. It sometimes gets pushed to the side, which is a bummer. So we have this dedicated person who's doing science for all of our kids, which is really wonderful.
I gotta ask, do kids these days watch Star Trek?
That's a really great question. Sometimes. When Prodigy was first airing, I had one kid who was super into it. And so we talked about that like every week when like a new episode was coming out, because that was really exciting.
Nice.
Right now, I don't think it's talked about as much. Some of the things like anime is huge right now with my class. So
Hmm.
that's kind of interesting. Some of the things that they're nerding out about. Some of them are aware of it because I actually have a Star Trek comic books in my classroom library.
Of course.
So I've gotten a few kids who've been really interested in like asking more. It's actually happened a few times that I have a few kids who are really into drawing and like sketching and art. And they always see my little Star Trek posters. And so I've had a few kids draw me Enterprises over the years, which has been really nice. So I think I may be a little gateway to them getting interested into the franchise at times. So that's nice.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for what you do, two very important jobs. But the main topic for today's discussion is this anti-fascist Star Trek watch list that Joe recently published on the website Twin City Geeks. So let's dive in to all of that. Joe, what prompted you to put together such a list?
It's a great question. So honestly, it was really just like the lead up to Starfleet Academy, the new show, and how it suddenly seemed to have really rubbed what I'll say just is like I think I used this term in the article, regressive reactionaries the wrong way.
Mm.
You saw like Elon Musk was commenting on like the stills because like of various body type and people of color. What's his face? Stephen Miller had comments about it, and like all these people were kind of like mad about how Star Trek looks and what it is and what it's become, and having and just having like really bad takes about it. So like really, people in power who are very conservative, I would say, and in my opinion, lean fascist, to put it nicely. And so it was just kind of that like that on top of like as you mentioned, Twin Cities Geek is the site I write for, and we're in the Twin Cities right now, which is currently like seeing like a really large surge of like ICE and federal officers here, to the point where if we want to take a step back to like what my job is teaching, I've like switched to being an online teacher because we have families who, don't immigrant families specifically who don't want to leave home right now or don't feel comfortable leaving home.
Wow.
So like most of our districts have been offering like a full-time online program for those families. Otherwise attendance is just, you know, down, right? Like significantly. So like those kind of things coupled, and then just like I'm also was just excited for new Star Trek. It's like something that I can kind of latch on to is like, oh, I love this thing. But I was like, you know what? I want to make an anti-fascist like Star Trek playlist because it's always been that, even though these people are suddenly latching on to this new show, like it's always been not their ideology.
Right.
So that's kind of what prompted it. Yeah.
I want to give Nicole a chance to chime in too if you want to talk about anything happening in the Twin Cities, what it's like to go through, what you all have been through over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's been stressful and sad in a lot of ways and frustrating. All of those types of emotions. I think really, going through various stages of grief. Like one day I'll listen to the news and I'll feel really like bummed out. And then another day I'll listen and I'll just be like, oh, like so mad
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like a little powerless and frustrated. But I will say it's definitely showcased, I think, what Minnesotans can do and accomplish when we work together. There's a lot of good work being done by people here, everyday people, whether they're dropping groceries off or like taking kids to and from school, people pivoting in their jobs to help out our neighbors and these people who are part of our community. And, everywhere I drive, there's like ice out signs everywhere. And I feel this sort of solidarity, I think, with like, neighbors and in the community. So it's a huge mixture of feelings. I think, and I don't know if this was part of it. I was thinking about how you included Terra Prime and what's the other one?
Demons.
Demons from Enterprise. And we had just watched that for an episode for Deep Space Love. And we were marveling at how close to home it felt. Like when we watched that, when we were going through Enterprise, I don't remember how many years ago. It wasn't that long. And we were like, oh, wow, yeah. Isn't it crazy how, this feels like it could happen again? And then I feel like we kind of went past the it could happen to again to it is happening again.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that was at the back of your mind when you were
So
also.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was kind of a spur of it too. Yeah, those episodes.
So, yeah, I provided a little bit of like editing help on the article, but
Yeah. No, she was proofreading throughout
I
it.
do proofread.
Teamwork, yeah.
Yeah.
No, Nicole, I also share the mix, the strange mix of feelings, watching from afar, of course, because I don't live in Minnesota, but just seeing the devastating, images and videos of what was going on, but also that it felt strangely hopeful to see this mass movement of people and almost like a turning point, that this is really major, and the kind of solidarity that you're all showing out there is really inspiring to see.
Thank you. It kind of reminds me of that Mr. Rogers quote, when there's like bad things happening, like look for the helpers.
Right. Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Well, thanks for being helpers. So as you said, Joe, Star Trek has always been anti-fascist. So I thought it would be good to just start off very simply with a quick definition. What does anti-fascist mean to you?
Great question. So essentially, I feel like it's just sort of an alignment of like progressive ideologies that's sort of an antithesis to kind of like extreme right-wing ideologies, extreme like fascism in a sense. It's like the idea of like promoting more freedom, promoting equality, promoting what I think we've all talked about many times is the values that we see in Star Trek, right? Like IDIC, IDIC, the infinite diversity, infinite combinations, those kinds of things. Like it's sort of those movements of trying to just combat those policies or programs or movements that are intended to actively sort of shackle people, right? Or actively drive wedges between people or instill hate and fear.
And a similar term is woke. You begin the article with the line Star Trek, it could be said, was woke before woke was part of the popular vernacular. Is anti-fascist and woke the same thing, or are they different concepts?
I will say, I will admit I use that term very tongue in cheek in the article a little
Hmm.
bit, just because I think it's become such originally it's an old term. It originated a long time ago in like the early 1900s. It was the idea of like being aware of like, social injustice and, racial injustice and being just like aware and involved in the idea of combating those things. It's definitely come back into play. And I think at first was in an earnest way, but now it seems to be really taken over by people who want to use it as a weapon, like weaponizing that word as like a cudgel to describe the things that they don't like.
Hmm.
And so I pulled that quote in more just because it feels like the term woke is being thrown at Star Trek, especially newer Star Trek, especially in just this like negative kind of bad faith way. And so I was kind of like, you know what? Star Trek's always been that, right?
Yeah.
The things that you are mad about, it's been there for a while.
So let's talk about the list in detail. It looks to me like this list features one episode at least from each of the major Star Trek television series. In some cases, you picked a pair of episodes, like Nicole mentioned, Demons and Terra Prime, that sort of go together or are duology within a certain series. But for the most part, it was just one. So I want to know, how hard was it to actually put together this list if you were constraining yourself to just one or two episodes from each series? What was the process of making this list like?
It was tough. I feel like I started it with the idea. Nicole, you reminded me of this with Demons and Terra Prime was a huge instigator to like I know what I'm choosing for Enterprise already.
Yes, that was like the first one.
And then there were a few others that I like already had in mind. The Drumhead, which I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about, was from TNG, was in my mind. I think the episodes from Picard that we talked about,
Oh yeah, that was
Assimilation and Watchers, just because that feels so like almost too on the nose to what's going on a little bit. Like those ones were in my mind. And so with that, like I kind of like I built outward a little bit. I had to kind of really think for some other ones that I was like, I know, I mean, each series really has multiple episodes that could really work. And I put this in the article that I was like, my playlist might be different from what yours might like, but I just wanted to highlight one from each series to kind of just celebrate the notion that every series is kind of carrying that torch still in some capacity. And so ones were harder than other. I think the original series has a lot that would work, but I kind of wanted to highlight one that's lesser talked about because I think a lot of people would kind of think of Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, the two-faced folks who it's a very strong indictment of racism and like what that can do to a culture. And so like, but I was like, I don't really want to do that one because it's been talked about so much. So I wanted to talk about something a little different. Prodigy was another hard one because I feel like it sort of takes a lot of Star Trek's ideals and tries to make it in a distillable way for like younger audiences. And so I was like, what's something that's specifically taking on like an anti-fascist notion? But then I was kind of thinking like thematically the idea of just like collectivism, workers' rights, rising up. And I was like, that's totally the plot of the first arc, right? So it kind of works. It's just like, it's kind of like once I'm digging into what I'm looking for, I think it did start to flow a lot more. Also, I couldn't not think of the quote from Shax in Lower Decks. Like that was on my mind the whole time. The fighting fascism is a full-time job.
You have that shirt.
I do have that on a shirt too. So.
I had all those Lower Decks shirts. Yeah,
Yeah.
that one was like a must buy.
Yeah. So I had to include that one too. But I don't know. Yeah. It's just kind of reviewing episodes, which is honestly like just a fun thing for me to do. I just love like digging into Star Trek as much as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how there are so many different ways to be anti-fascist in Star Trek. I mean, there are the episodes where they literally go and punch Nazis, and then there's others that are, quotes about the Bajoran resistance and how Shax, has to remind folks that it was a full-time job to, fight those Cardassians. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Nicole, you mentioned that you proofread the article as it was being made. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on the content of the article. Was there a particular episode that you were hoping that would make the cut that Joe left out?
I think he made great choices overall, and I definitely, all the reasons that he explained for why he had chosen the ones that he did. Like you said, if you're sticking to like one, or if you're going to expand to be like, well, this two-parter because it's a single story. I was thinking about what I would have added potentially, and not necessarily swapping out, but well, Deep Space Nine honestly is
That was hard.
yeah, that's
So many
down.
Yeah.
Homefront and Paradise Lost, I think, is the two-parter. I can't remember what season that is.
It's 4.
Thank you.
I also, yeah, it's.
You looked at that one
I
too.
did consider that one. It's a really good choice too.
I think that one's interesting because it's showing how fear can lead to people almost giving up their rights in order for security, and even showing that even something we trust like Starfleet, like as the viewers, and being led down the path of like, well, yeah, they need to be doing the blood tests, and they should be, you don't know who's a changeling, or who's sabotaging and who's the spy, or et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's something I would have probably added, and I think that one is a really good one because again, I think there are a lot of folks who look at the United States and say, well, things like that can't happen here, or they can't happen here again. But I think that pair of episodes shows how fear can be utilized as a tool for getting fascism fingernails kind of like dug into a society.
What you're saying just reminded me of the idea, like you're saying, like somehow how it can happen with Starfleet. Like it shows like institutions can be malleable a little bit, and they can be utilized by the people who are, in charge of those institutions. And I feel like that's what we sort of see. It's like a lot of people are like, no way, our system of checks and balances could be corrupted. But then we're seeing like, oh, if someone just has the will and the power to just kind of throw all that by the wayside, right? Like it's like we see that, and so it's a really
When
apt
your
comparison.
Rules
Yeah.
don't apply to you, or
Exactly.
even your own rules to some extent when it comes to Starfleet.
Yeah, norms and rules and what those mean, really. Yeah.
The only other one I think I was thinking of, and again, it kind of comes from looking at how fear can influence decision making, is the Discovery episode, But to Connect, where they are meeting about the DMA after Book's planet gets destroyed by, at that time it's an unknown, weapon or thing that caused his planet to just vanish, essentially. And I think that one is interesting because I mean there is fear powering like at least books decisions and like in some of the other world's decisions, but it also shows how I think in what you would maybe consider a relatively healthy democracy, how fear can be counterbalanced with sort of multiple voices and saying like, okay, yes, this happened, and we don't want to become what we fear in return.
Right. Oh, that's so
It's a
profound.
good one.
I love that. That we can't let fear rule our lives, but even worse, turn us into that which we fear. And I love what you said about how the antidote to that is to bring in all different kinds of voices and perspectives.
Yeah. So yeah, those would be maybe my like addendums to the list,
Great choices.
among others. But yeah, those are the two I thought of recently.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, there are just so many to pick from. So I don't envy your task, Joe, of having to pick one from each series. That must have been really difficult. And we don't have time to talk about all 15 that you put on the list tonight, but let's talk about a few.
Yeah.
And speaking of fear, I think that one that really stuck out to me that I saw on the list and thought, of course, that's a perfect choice was your choice from The Next Generation, which was the drumhead. And so just to recap in this episode, Captain Picard gives one of his many famous monologues, quote,
You know, there are some words I've known since I was a schoolboy. With the first link, the chain is forged. The first speech censured, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, chains us all irrevocably. Those words were uttered by Judge Aaron Satie as wisdom and warning. The first time any man's freedom is trodden on, we're all damaged.
And in this episode, basically, there's this drumhead trial where an admiral is trying to find a suspected spy or traitor aboard the Enterprise. And there's this young officer who basically lied on his Starfleet application. He's part Romulan, but he writes that he's part Vulcan out of fear, right? That if he told the truth, he wouldn't be let into Starfleet because the Romulans are an antagonistic civilization to the Federation. And that is discovered and all of a sudden, casts doubt that maybe there's something even more treacherous about this person. Maybe he's a Romulan spy or planning something extraordinarily nefarious, although there was no evidence that that was the case at all. The only wrongdoing that this officer had committed was just lying on his application a long, long time ago. So yeah, let's talk about the drumhead, and I'd love to know your thoughts for why you picked this episode, and we can circle back to the Picard quote as well.
Yeah, I mean, the description is really apt. Yeah, as you're describing it, actually reminds me a lot of the one I picked for Strange New Worlds, Ad Aspera Paraspera, with about the trial about her being Illyrian. Like I was like, it's interesting that as much as it's exploring like institutions and what institutions can do, it's exploring like identity too, and it really digs into like we're talking about too that fear and like so like how the fear leads to just all this division. Like he was afraid to like really be who he was or like admit to who he was because he knew that ingrained prejudice was already there within Starfleet. And it basically is proven right, through this whole thing, which is sad. But again, it's looking at like how easily the institution again is weaponized, right? To like go after. Then she's like using her power as an admiral. She's using the weight of the Starfleet behind her to make this drumhead trial and like forge it in the way that she wants. But it takes people, and like this is kind of reflected back what we talked about here, and it takes people, right? Like we can't really always look to somebody to save us, and it's like it's Picard, it's some of the people on the Enterprise who are like, this is wrong. We need to make a stand. If we want this organization, if we want Starfleet, if we want the Federation to be what it says it is, to be what we stand for, we need to always be vigilant and uphold those values, right? Even if it means putting ourselves on the line. And I think it's just a really powerful statement. And just to think it came out like so long ago, like that these themes are so resonant that they're coming back and over and over and over again. It's just really good, and we know it. We talk all the time how great Picard monologues are, like endlessly great, like quotable. It's just like the hoorah moments always. You're just so excited. But I remember after we first watched this one, or I guess first rewatched it back when we were doing our rewatch, like I had texted multiple friends who were not Trekkies. I was like, okay, you gotta watch this one episode, please.
This is the one, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a great one.
Nicole, what does that Picard quote mean to you?
I feel like it sounds cheesy, but it keeps reminding me of that poem, first they came for, this group, and then I was like, well, it didn't really apply to me, and then until like there's no one left to speak for me, to paraphrase that very roughly.
Yeah.
It sort of just feels like it's that, like the first time you sacrifice some sort of right or freedom in the name of security, then that will continuously be used to justify everything thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
And how we're not so different. I mean, it's easy to, in that episode, it'd be easy for Picard to, he's, fully human, and, he's not the one on trial, but understanding that, okay, if it can happen to this person, it could happen to any of us. We're all linked together, like we're not separate. And like at some point, it does affect all of us.
The way you're talking about it too reminds me of just the way that the admiral goes after this young officer, where she's like, there's no evidence that he's involved in anything. It's his identity, but she also capitalized on the fact that, oh, he lied on his application, right?
Mm-hmm.
He did this one bad thing. And I feel like that is something that we are seeing a lot today, where especially with the two folks who were killed in Minneapolis up here, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, look, he kicked a car a couple weeks ago, or they did this, right? It's like, none of that means somebody deserves to die or to be targeted for something, right? Like regardless of what you think of what they did in the past, like that is not applicable to this incident, right? And I think that's really on display in this episode too. It's like, yes, he may have lied on that application, but that does not mean that he is a terrorist. That does not mean that he deserves this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
Rewatching this episode for our conversation tonight, I knew that this Picard quote was coming. So, it didn't move me the way it did, like, say, the first time I ever watched this episode, where I was like, whoa, oh my God, this is amazing.
For sure.
But the quote, and it's just a brief quote, where I think he's talking to this corrupt admiral, and he's expressing his dismay, and he just gets up and he leaves. And as he's walking out the door, he's like, I don't like what we've become.
Mm-hmm.
And that simple line just hit me so hard, like a ton of bricks, because that's exactly how I feel when I read the news about what's going on in America today. I'm just like, I don't like what we've become.
Yeah.
Yes, simpler.
Great delivery.
Simpler, but yes.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward now all the way to Star Trek Picard, and your choices for Star Trek Picard were the episodes titled Assimilation and Watcher from the second season, where the entire cast of heroes has gone back through time to the year 2024, and they land, well, I guess they land where? In France, but then they go to Los Angeles. It's, it's a sci-fi story. And they're exploring LA, and Captain Cristobal Rios is essentially abducted by ICE in a raid in a contemporary Los Angeles hospital. And I was wondering, now that these terrifying events are literally happening in the streets of American cities today, what emotions welled up inside of you while rewatching these scenes?
Picard's such an interesting series. I talk about it in the article a little bit. It just feels like it's hard to deny it's messy. Like it just had so many different directions it was trying to go. And I think season 2 is fascinating because I feel like it was filmed during COVID mostly. And so I think that there were elements where they had to really slash the budget a lot and they couldn't do certain things they wanted to do. So they really extended this time in contemporary USA, right? But it's fascinating to think, like, the show dropped in 2022, but then we see Los Angeles is on fire in there. Like that happened in like 2024, like pretty significantly.
It happens every year now.
Ice raids. I mean, the ice raids are not necessarily a new thing. Like ice has been around.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
But the way that we're seeing it weaponized now, more so, is it's very intense. And it just feels like I was like,
the idea of a place that should be a safe space also.
This exactly, because that's the big thing that's been happening. And we, why, my job has been affected. Like schools, hospitals, churches are no longer off limits. And that's what we're seeing in that episode specifically, that the free clinic. Like, and it seemed like the character Teresa, I think her name was, right? If I remember correctly, she was kind of like, this is something that happens and we need to be aware of and we need to be vigilant for. And I was like, that seems
That's
like
scary that
that's
she's
scary.
like, this is just a thing we deal with.
Yeah, and it sort of feels like the way
That's the
that
norm.
some, especially probably, folks from immigrant families and are feeling like there's a fear of going out. Like I just have to have my head on a swivel. I got to always be aware of these things. And so it rings really true in a way that's almost different than Star Trek does. Like Star Trek often operates in this like metaphorical space or allegorical space because it's the future and they can play around with these things in different ways. And it's like, this is so direct.
Yeah.
And like right there, like contemporary, kind of like the Bell Rights episode a little bit, but that's still like a little sci-fi-ish. But this is just like, it's there. It's very interesting. And
Yeah, it kind of removes, it's like probably the closest that it comes to like removing.
Yeah, sometimes like the
That
space sci-fi stuff is almost like a safe buffer a little bit, and it takes that out, which is good. Like it's pushing the boundary, and I think it was well done to have depicted that and shown that in a show like that.
Mm-hmm.
The other interesting element too is I think this is in Demons, right? When we see him actually in the ICE detention center, or not Demons, what did I say? Watchers, right? The second one, right? And they keep talking about deporting him back to where he came from. And there's no evidence that he's like even from another country in that era. Like he's, like that whole element. And that feels also kind of true. Where it's just like they're, American citizens or wherever you're from, they're just like, you look like you're not from here. You look different. So we're gonna snag you. And so that felt true to form as well.
Or this past weekend where people were complaining about Bad Bunny. How dare they choose a non-American performer for the Super Bowl halftime show?
Yep.
And it's like, he's from Puerto Rico. That's part of America.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. And not having an understanding of these different cultures that are not your own. Again, ignorance and sort of that like opposite of idic.
Exactly. Let's now turn to the latest Star Trek series, Star Trek Starfleet Academy. How does Starfleet Academy fit right into this long-standing anti-fascist framework that Star Trek established back in the 1960s and persists all the way to the year 2026?
Starfleet Academy was sort of the instigator to thinking about like wanting to do this article a little bit with that, those quotes as well as those Enterprise episodes. And at the time of writing it, I think we'd only watched the first 2 episodes. So there wasn't a whole lot necessarily with specifically anti-fascist themes. But that being said, there was a lot of really interesting ideas that were coming forth. There was that quote, I think, that I put in the article from Nala Ake, right? Which was the one by like, separating parents from their children is not exceptional. It's abhorrent, right?
It's reprehensible.
That's it, right? So like that was a really great quote, but like there's a lot of like setting up themes of grappling with like past wrongs, especially that, and again I've used this word a lot, but the institution of Starfleet, right? Things that it has stumbled on and reflecting on past mentalities that perhaps were colonialist, right? Imperialist, which we've seen before, and it's been critiqued by fans, and it's it's part of the growing franchise, right? But it's like this seems like a space where the characters and then the show itself is going to interrogate those ideas, which seems really prescient for the time that we're in, and setting it in this era, this 32nd century post burn, right? The dilithium blew up, and people were isolated, right? We have the kids, the younger generation characters grew up in that burn era, which it as the show is progressing and the way it's sort of described does feel a little bit like they're playing it as an allegory to kids who kind of grew up in like a COVID era, right? And I'm seeing that a little bit with just being like they're coming at the things that we as older folks or adults appreciated in a different way. They're looking at it through a different lens because they're looking at it through systems that have failed them.
Wow.
And I think that's really fascinating.
Say a little bit more about that if you are able to, about the kids that you're teaching in class these days, how things have changed. I mean, the only experience that I've had is because I'm not a teacher, but my institute runs a summer research program for undergraduates around the country. We get about a dozen each year, and they come in. And my only experience with this is that sometimes there are these like knowledge gaps in somebody's scientific training. They might come in and they might tell me, oh, I actually don't know any geometry. And I'd be like, what? How do you not know geometry? Aren't you in college? And they're like, well, that was during the COVID years. I was
Yeah.
supposed to learn geometry, but I didn't. Yeah, but tell me more about how this is expressed in what you're seeing.
I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, I feel like there was a couple solid years there where we had, like especially with the younger kids that I'm teaching, where they, missed out on very formative years of just like socialization, development, even skills that we're trying to build on, where it's just like we had to really go back and reteach in a different level. And like, yes, we did do online learning and all that stuff, but it's so much harder, especially with language barriers, or taking into account students with, different kinds of needs, different, abilities, all of those things and factored in. I guess we couldn't get a one size fits all approach to really to help every kid, even though that's kind of what we had to do at the time. And so there are these gaps, and it's interesting, but there's also an element where I think, like I said, like things that we kind of had taken for granted as and trusted as like those things are there, they're gonna, work for us. They saw firsthand that it didn't quite do that. Like we all kind of worked together and tried to make things work, but there are certainly, like you said, there are gaps, and
Yeah.
there are issues, and I think that's reflected in the show a little bit how the older folks the older characters are trying to say like these are our Starfleet values, these are our values, and the kids are kind of like not always wise to it right away or hip to it right away. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but like
So didn't
they
experience
didn't
that.
experience that, so they're like, okay,
It's
like
all talk.
it's all talk to them. It's like, okay, you got to prove it to us a little bit, and I think I think it's just really interesting to see that comparison, which I feel has got to be intentional from the writers, right? Like thinking about that of like setting it in this era has got to be like, that's how they can play with that.
I don't think I'll ever watch an episode of Starfleet Academy the same way again. I mean, you're just blowing my mind here about that parallel. It never occurred to me, but you're right to have characters enter into Starfleet Academy thinking that the institution of the Federation and of Starfleet has failed them up until this moment,
Hmm.
and then try to learn to embrace the values and become a part of that institution and then better that institution from the inside is something, yeah, really powerful. I'm gonna look out for more of that as the series goes on.
Yeah, that seems exciting. I feel like that's what I'm excited. Like the promise of that is what I'm excited about there.
Let's hope they deliver.
Yes.
So at the time of this recording, we're only about halfway through the first season of Starfleet Academy. And I just want to get your take on the relationships that we've seen sort of develop so far, because you two run a podcast called Deep Space Love, which examines the relationships across the entire Star Trek universe. So I'd love to ask for your way too early takes on the relationships in the latest Star Trek show.
Mm.
I will say we've only watched the first four. So even as
I think at this point 5 is out, but we are watching 5 and 6 together next week, I think.
Okay.
Was our plan. But so we've done 4 so far, yeah. Okay, so Caleb Mir and Karima is one that's really budding right now. Karima, the Betazoid student who joined the War College, and Beta Z, sorry. Beta Z student.
Yeah. It is Betazoid, and then
I don't know.
Beta Z's the
Beta
planet.
Z's the planet.
My bad.
It's okay. But there's kind of a budding romance there. I think that's really fascinating. It's sufficiently messy in a teen angsty way, where he's very salty that she joined the War College. She does apologize to him at one point, like, I should have told you I owed you that. And I was like, I don't know if you did. Like, you knew each other for a day, like but it does capture those kind of messy like teen vibes, and I think that's interesting. I'm excited to see that develop. I don't know, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, I'm interested to see where that goes because, I mean, I'm not sure if that first episode with them together, there was the like get to know each other, and then there was that moment with the whale, and it was
That was sweet,
like
yeah.
sweet and, kind of romantic, and then it's like interrupted, and then they kind of have their fight out in the courtyard there, and yeah, the misunderstandings, which, happen in all relationships also, no matter, young or old, or there's always going to be, miscommunications and like assumptions made. But yeah, I'm interested to see where that goes. I think the perspectives that they're coming from, she sort of, comes from this very structured society, and also one that was like pretty much keeping to itself for a while. So she's been very sheltered. I think that's what I'm trying to say in this structure. And she clearly is trying to break out of that. And he is sort of that opposite, where he has kind of lived in chaos his whole life and clearly hopped around and not had like a single structure or place to call home, and has always felt like he's on his own and didn't have a family or community to rely upon. So the dichotomy between them is going to be fascinating to see flesh out and see if, that's going to take them somewhere, or maybe not. Maybe it's a little bit of like a brief romance and then they will end up seeing other people or something. But their differences and where they're coming from presents an interesting situation through which to view, kind of like you said, these different perspectives from different cadets. Yeah. We just kind of realized that, am I blanking on their names? The two teachers are in a relationship.
Jet Reno and Laura Thok.
Thank you.
That was fun. I mean, we don't know too much about them as a
That's
couple,
cool.
but the idea that they're a couple is delightful.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. I feel like, yeah, Jet Reno deserves a happy
Happiness.
relationship.
Yes, she does. Very much so. And they seem like a really fun pairing.
Odd couple.
I'm hoping to see more of that develop. That's
Yeah.
cool. I feel like we've got hints at a couple of their small relationships between the cadets that might be,
Figure that out, whether they're really
Yeah.
meaning that or not.
Well, so here's the thing. Okay. I think we're both hopeful with, we mentioned Jet Reno and Laura Thok, like there's going to be like non-hetero relationships moving forward. I'm hopeful with that. I think Discovery really pioneered that. I think we haven't really seen too much of it since as much. And I think I would like to see that more here. And I feel like there's hints at it with some of the characters that we might get, non-hetero relationships, which would be good. The framing of it, I feel like they've been really casual about being the Klingon episode, like he has a triad of parents, right? That there's like kind of polyamorous relationships. And I think there's been other pieces of dialogue that just imply like couple pairings. It doesn't have to be the norm with them, and it's just kind of a casual thing that's to throw out. So I'm optimistic to see like different kinds of relationships reflected and represented. I'm not sure if we're going to see that within the main cast per se. We've just seen like small little hints.
But
tension
in, that's a lot.
That is a lot.
We've already kind
to
of
think
named.
about it. Yeah, it's a lot.
A triad of parents and a queer like relationship between the teachers, and maybe it'll manifest in
and even framing. Like I feel like one of the things that I kind of had noted, especially in teen dramas, like when you have like two, especially like it's always just like young hot people framed together. It's like, oh, are they going to be a couple? Like I feel like there's always that anticipation, no matter what. And it's always usually like a man and a woman in that case. But I feel like there's that scene with Jaden and the other cadet where they were like really close to each other. And I don't think it was meant to be romantic, but I just feel like they allow the framing of those scenes to happen between men or two women together. And it's just like, it's allowing that tension to be like, oh, is it there? Oh, maybe not. That's fine. Like we can just assume it could be anybody. It doesn't have to be just the set templates of couples, I think,
Mm-hmm.
And so I see that being in just the way it's shot. And I appreciate that. The other one I wanted to shout out, though, is, again, the Klingon episode, how Captain Ake, Holly Hunter's character, obviously had a previous fling with that old Klingon.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I love the idea that she had, because she's lived for like 400 years, that she just has like romantic trysts with just all sorts of weird, interesting people that might show up. That's fun.
And play a part, in whatever problem she's trying to solve.
She's like, oh, I know a guy.
Well, I'm having a blast watching Starfleet Academy,
Agreed.
Trying to figure out how all these relationships will end up developing, or if certain ones will peter out. And I don't know, it may just be me getting old, but I'm also really invested in the stories of the teachers, right? In addition to the students. I love seeing Robert Picardo back in action. He's still got it. He's so funny. And I love Captain Ake's persona, and also the way that she's mentoring and teaching, and just her philosophy toward all of that, and trying to right the wrongs that she had committed 15 years ago. So that's been wonderful to watch as well.
Yeah.
And then of course the diversity of flavors and forms of relationships that you just summarized across just the first 4 episodes of the series. Maybe to put a bow on this episode, how do you see that just kaleidoscope of different kinds of relationships play a part in the anti-fascist nature of Star Trek?
I think the lack of uniformity, and again, going back to, I mean, we talk about infinite diversity and infinite combinations, and I think a large facet of fascism is uniformity and purity, et cetera, those adjectives. And I think that having these different types of relationships and just different characters from different backgrounds represented is anti-fascist by nature in that sense.
I don't even think I can add to that. That was well said.
I don't know. I actually was like, did a deep dive into like, yeah, like the actual term of fascism and like how, because yeah, I mean, circling back to the initial question of like defining anti-fascism, I was like, well, first we need to define fascism.
Mhm.
So uniformity and homogeny, whether it's explicitly said or not, I mean, it's in subtext regardless of, when you read those, especially historical like accounts from those people who were known fascists, that's definitely, whether it's explicit or not, it's like present. So anyway, I think, yeah, IDIC is definitely just anti-fascist by nature.
No, that was really interesting, Nicole, that you brought up. Yeah, we should really try to define fascism before trying to define anti-fascism. And it sounds like, if I got what you were saying from the research that you had done, that fascism is really, well, it can be thought of in terms of who belongs and who doesn't, right? It's like there are these strict boundaries for who belongs in our society, or not just who, but like what thoughts belong in our society. And anti-fascism and the infinite diversity and infinite combinations philosophy is about expanding that belonging to all different kinds of being and becoming, and I think that that's what Star Trek advocates for, is that expansive and inclusive version of who actually belongs and what thoughts belong and what perspectives belong, rather than just keeping it to a very narrow subset of all the possibilities in the universe.
Another thing I might point out also that I'm picking up on in like our own experience in current day is challenging, whatever society is telling you, and I think that's another difference in like, is there space to challenge what is supposed to be the status quo? So I think me pulling out the Deep Space Nine episodes, Homefront and Paradise Lost, was my way of kind of incorporating that too, where one of the things about Star Trek that it will sometimes do is, again, put you as the viewer in the position of watching this institution that is, I don't want to say the good guys, but is like trying to do the right thing. And when it doesn't do the right thing, like Star Trek writing is like willing to challenge your perception of that. And then in show, again, like Picard saying like, this isn't who we are, or I'm like ashamed of what we've become. Being able to say that and not, be punished for it is also another important aspect of free thought, I guess.
Yes. Well, Joe and Nicole, thanks so much for being on Strange New Worlds. This was a blast, and keep up all the good work.
Thank you
for having us. Wow, we said that at the same time. Not intentional.
Great minds.
Yes, but thank you.
Thank you, Micah. This has been a pleasure.
That was Joe and Nicole Praska, hosts of the Deep Space Love podcast, a podcast that explores love and relationships throughout the Star Trek universe. You can find Deep Space Love wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow it at DS Love Pod on Instagram and Blue Sky. I know the world can look like a depressing place right now, but Star Trek provides hope. One of the many reasons why I love Star Trek is because it's not just another superhero story, which encourages us to look for larger-than-life figures who can change the world because they can inflict and endure tremendous amounts of violence. Rather, real change in the real world comes when regular people with ordinary strengths and ordinary failings come together and demand change, just like Minnesota did earlier this year. My favorite scenes in Star Trek are when a bunch of people who are no more unusual than you or me combine their diverse talents, perspectives, and experiences together to overcome incredible odds. If you're enjoying Strange New Worlds, don't forget to leave a rating or a review, or just tell a friend about the show. Next time on Strange New Worlds, we'll be joined by astrophysicist Katie Mack to talk about, dun dun dun, the end of the universe. You won't want to miss it. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you out there. Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I feel like I keep stepping on your words. I'm so sorry.
It's all good, all good.
Podcasting, right?
Yep.